All right. So on to passage 2 of the second practice test of the ACT English section. Let's just get to it. The first passage this passage is called Tejano Music and its Meadowlark. This is basically about the origins of Tejano music and where it came from, what it is, and then it talks about an example of one of its most famous musicians. So let's get right to it. 16. It says one of the liveliest folk music forms to develop in 20th century is Tejano music. Nothing wrong with that. It's just one of the things, one of the examples. It's like one of the fruits I like most is oranges. Something like that. So F, no change. That seems to be fine. One of the most liveliest. This is redundant because liveliest is a form that expresses the most, right? So that's redundancy. The most lively folk music forms to develop. This is incorrect because, first of all, it changes the meaning of the sentence. This is not saying it's the most lively. This is just saying one of them, all right? And if you have the most lively, that's singular, whereas here you have this plural, right? You don't have the most lively forms, you have the most lively form, singular, with no S at the end. And then you have the liveliest, is the same issue where you have the liveliest, which is singular, but then you have forms, which is plural. And then not only that, it changes the meaning of the sentence because the sentence is just saying it's just one of them, it's not the most, all right? So F is the answer. If we go to 17, also known as Tex-Mex or border music because of its having origins. All right. I've said this before, and this isn't the only problem, but whenever you have the words being, all right, whenever you have the words being or having, be very careful because there's almost always a better way to write something than having them written with having or being. And so they can be right sometimes, but very rarely. So definitely whenever you see those, just be careful. And this is one of those situations because you don't need the word having, right? If it's already its, like if you say, oh, it's bag or something, or it's bookshelf. You don't need to say having. It's already connotes, right? It's already means possession, all right? And so having is completely unnecessary. The only problem here is that it's here is the contraction form, which means it is. This is not what that is saying. It's saying also known as Tex-Mex or border music because of its origins, possessive, the origins that belong to it, all right? So B would have to be the correct answer. A is not correct. C is not correct either because it got rid of the having, but it didn't change the contraction. And then D is also wrong because it is saying that it is by itself plural. When what is this really talking about? It is singular, also known as Tex-Mex or border music, or essentially just Tejano music. That's a singular thing. And so singular would need to be it's by itself, okay? And this basically just means belong to something plural, and that wouldn't be correct. If you go to 18, it says, at this point, the writer is considering adding the following parenthetical phrase, polkas and waltzes. Given that it is true, would this be a relevant addition to make here? Well, let's look at what this says. In the late 19th century, German immigrants to South Texas and northern Mexico brought with them their dance music and the button accordion. Well, what's their dance music? polkas and waltzes. Well, that could make sense. That actually makes sense to put there because it's describing, well, what kind of dance music is it? So, given that it is true, would this be irrelevant? Yeah, it would be relevant. Does it have to be there? It doesn't have to be there, but it's relevant, right? It's not a random detail. So sure, I think one of the answer choices would probably have to be one of the yes ones, not one of the no ones. So if we look at F, it says yes because it can help the reader have a better understanding of the music being referred to. Yep. What kind of dance music? Polkas and waltzes. G, yes, because it helps explain to the reader why this music became so popular. No, that doesn't say why it's so popular. It just gives a description of what kind of music it is. H, no, because it fails to explain the connection between this music and the button accordion. No, it doesn't need, first of all, it doesn't have to explain the connection, all right? But again, it really is just explaining the dance music, but you can sort of gather that probably there is a connection between that kind of music and the button accordion, right? They're not going to have, when they talk about German music in general, or German immigrants and the music they brought, they're not going to talk about German dance music and then an instrument that's just kind of a random instrument that has nothing to do with German music. So it doesn't really need to explain that out fully, but not only that, it's fine if this just explains what kind of dance music it is. It is relevant, right? It relates to what's going on. And then you have the last one, note because it is inconsistent with the style of this essay to mention specific musical forms. No, it's not, because this essay talks about specific musical forms. It talks about Tejano music and Tex-Mex and border music. So this essay does that the whole time. So it's not inconsistent, it's consistent with it. So the only answer choice that makes sense is F, right? If we go to 19, it says, who began to use the accordion in their own dance music. Asparangas or huapangus and rancheras. Okay, this is a pretty bad pronunciation. But this is very similar to what I've said before. If you have this preposition in, this whole thing is a prepositional phrase. You do not need to separate that from anything else with commas, okay? Comma here, unnecessary. What about the comma here? You actually do need the comma there, okay? And that's because huapangos and rancheras are descriptive words. They're examples of music, of what kind of dance music, all right? And so you basically need a comma after this to say, well, what kind of dance music? Huapangos and rancheras, all right? So in this case, A wouldn't be correct, but B would be correct. C would not be correct because you have this comma before in. And then D, according to their own dance music, would not be correct because you do need a comma after this. If you don't have the comma, it just sounds like who began to use the accordion in their own dance music, huapangos and rancheras. Well, it basically almost sounds like a run-on sentence because this is in their own dance music, where they use the accordion. Well, what is this? What is huapangos and rancheras? It's not clear. You could say almost that, well, maybe they use that kind of thing, the accordion in their dance music, and they use it in huapangos, and they use it in rancheras. But just because this is about dance music in general, and these are specific types of dance music, that kind of gives it away that this is the general category, and these are specific examples that sort of need to be separated and listed as such. Okay? 20. All right. It says, eventually, a unique musical style developed based on duet singing and instrumentation of accordion. All right. This is something that you do not. This is an issue where you have an unnecessary form of punctuation. This semicolon is wrong because what you have to have before and after the semicolon are independent clauses, independent sentences with their own subjects, their own verbs. So this first part, eventually, a unique musical style developed. Yeah, it's a short sentence, but that's a complete sentence. Developed is the verb, musical style is the subject. So that's fine, but after it says based on duet singing and an instrumentation of accordion, drums, upright bass, and bajo sexto. Okay, the Spanish 12-string bass guitar. The problem here is you don't have a verb or a subject. Okay, you have developed is the actual verb. Based is a verb form, and then you have this basically a giant prepositional phrase on duet sing, blah 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 blah. This is a whole thing is almost like a giant prepositional, not here, up to here, just a giant prepositional phrase. So this semicolon basically makes that whole thing wrong. So no change is not the correct answer. You could say, gee, style based on, developed a musical style developed based on duet singing. That makes perfect sense. You don't have the unnecessary punctuation after the preposition. Again, you don't need punctuation there. And this has that unnecessary punctuation, so H is wrong. And then J would be wrong because of that comma after style. Why is that wrong? It says, eventually a new musical style, comma, developed. That's wrong because you have a comma right after the subject. That's like you don't need to separate a subject and a verb with a comma. That's like saying I, comma, walked to the store, right? You just say I walked to the store. There's no comma needed. And if you look at J, that's what that does. It separates the subject and verb with a comma. That's completely unnecessary. All right, 21. Let's get to it. It says, it was conjunto and became the heart of Tejano music. Well, what was conjunto? What was conjunto? You can basically figure out it was the unique musical style that was developed. It's just that you sort of have like all these nouns. I mean, I know they're part of the prepositions, but it makes it somewhat unclear what it is referring to. And so this sentence is not grammatically incorrect necessarily. It's just a technicality based on a lack of a very clear connection between what it is and what it's referring to. So to make that clear, you'd basically have to choose B, which says this style known as conjunto. And by the way, it's conjunto because in Spanish, the J sounds like an H. So B works. C, being known as conjunto. This is two problems. This has the it, where there's no clear antecedent. It's sort of unclear what it's referring to, even though if you kind of think about it, it's clear. Grammatically, it's unclear. Also, the being known as conjunto, that being is completely unnecessary, like I've said before. If you wanted to keep this, you could just say known as conjunto. You don't even need the being, right? And then it being conjunto, well, you have the being problem, you have the it problem, and you don't have, you could say it being conjunto became the heart of, that's just a run-on sentence, because it being conjunto just means because it was. It's like because it was conjunto, comma, became the heart. You essentially just have no subject there. Even though this noun makes it seem like it's a subject, this would have to be some kind of modifier. And so you'd need to follow it with a comma and then a subject, and there's no subject, it just has the verb. And so that is just, wrong for a variety of reasons. C is just the worst choice. So B has to be the answer. All right, let's go to 22. Which of the following alternatives to the underlined portion would not be acceptable? Okay, sometimes these are logic based, and sometimes these is just which one is just totally grammatically wrong. But most of the time it's logic based. So 22. The Mendoza family made their living working alternatively as field hands, and they were touring musicians. All right. So it's about made their living doing something. Earn their living by, that makes sense grammatically and logically, that's fine. Made their living from, that's okay, that's also fine. You could say I made my living from doing this. H, made their living on, that is actually incorrect because you'd have to say made their living, or you could say made their living, or you could say made their living from. You actually don't even need the from. This is just an issue where this is an idiomatic expression. You don't make your living on doing something. You make your living from doing something, or earn your living by doing something. And so the correct answer here would basically be F and G, and J would also be grammatically correct. Earn their living working alternatively, okay? But made their living on, this is the problem, all right? So all these are fine. You don't even need the from here. It's just that the living on, that's incorrect, okay? And there are all sorts of little idiomatic phrases where you need to use this preposition or these kinds of prepositions with this word or that preposition with that word. They're called idioms. You can really have two approaches. Some of them you just have to memorize, and some of them you can actually kind of logically figure out, well, does it make sense to write the word in here? Just try your best. Definitely, I would suggest having a list of idiomatic phrases, and anytime you come across something like this, like living on, write it down in your notes so that you remember living on is not something that's correct, okay? Because it's unlike a rule like subject verb, make sure that every subject has a verb to form a complete sentence, or make sure there's consistency in keeping things singular or keeping things plural. This is not a one-time general rule, but sort of you have to basically just know a lot of idiomatic expressions and know which ones don't work at all. All right, on to question 23. You have all the way at the bottom, it says the Mendoza family made their living working alternately as field hands, and they were touring musicians. All right, there's two problems with this, just the way it is right now. First of all, it says they were touring musicians. So they is a new grammatical subject, were touring is a new verb. You have this new complete sentence here. They were touring musicians. But if you have a new complete sentence, all right, that's not the start of a new sentence, what you need is a separation from the previous independent clause, meaning you need a comma after, field hands, all right, and then you need and they. But this doesn't have the comma after field hands, so there's no indication that this should be a new sentence. The other thing is, it says alternately, right? So alternately means this or that. Well, or this and that. And in this case, it would just say alternately as field hands or what? Well, it basically, you have field hands and you could figure out they were also touring musicians, but grammatically, it kind of leaves it hanging, because grammatically, this is saying this is no longer part of alternately, this is a completely new separate thing. And so, even though logically you can make sense of it, grammatically it's sort of unclear, and grammatically it's not constructed in a way where alternately gives like the two options it needs to give, okay? So A would not be correct for those two reasons. B as well, that's a problem because you have and then you have as well. Well, both and as well mean additionally, right? So that's an issue of redundancy, it's an issue of repetition. That can't be right. Being, be careful of being, because every time it's always a wordy, unnecessary way of phrasing something. And it would say alternately as field hands and being touring musicians. Well, being touring musicians The way that sounds is it basically sounds like some kind of modifier where you could say they were working alternately as field hands, and being touring musicians, they also worked as something else. They did this, right? So what you want to have is alternately. Let me draw that out for you, what I just said, because I think if I just say it, it can sound confusing. You basically need to have alternately as one thing or alternately as the second thing. Well, what's the first thing? The first thing is field hands, right? Field hands. The second thing is touring musicians, right? Well, if you say alternately as field hands and being touring musicians, first of all, it doesn't keep this construction, which you need. They were working alternately as this or as this. The other problem is that when you say being, it sort of introduces what could be a modifying clause. You could say it's like, being a teacher, I like to do this, right? Being a teacher, I like talking about different stuff, right? Being a teacher, blah, 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 blah. It's kind of just a modifying phrase that should be maybe an add-on to as this, but it shouldn't replace as whatever that second part is. So it makes that sort of unclear. Is this a modify? Is as touring or is being touring musicians a modifying phrase, or is it the alternative option? Okay. So if you look at D as, it's just simple and straight to the point, and it really just covers all your bases, and what it breaks the sentence down to is alternately as field hands and as touring musicians. Period. That's it. It does everything it needs to do. The whole sentence is a complete sentence, and it has that proper construction of alternately as one thing or as another, or and as another. Okay? All right, on to question 24. It says the writer is considering deleting the following clause from the preceding sentence, placing a period after the word rappers. So this is just, let's just take this whole part out and see, does that make things better? Where music publishers had song lyrics printed in the hope of making them popular, should the writer make this deletion? All right, well, that's this part, okay? So if we take that out, it says Mendoza learned the words to many of her songs from bubblegum rappers, period. Right, and then it says in 1920, blah, 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 it just continues on. Well, is this relevant? Well, I think so. I mean, why would it be? Because if you just say she learned song lyrics from bubblegum rappers, if you buy gum, or if I buy gum, it kind of just says the label, right? I mean, I don't really chew gum, but I buy, like, if I chew gum, it's just like plain. In Korea, like, xylitol gum is really popular, but, there's no lyrics, there's no main sentences or anything like that on the bubblegum wrappers or the packaging. So this might sound weird if you don't have this part. It says, where music publishers had song lyrics printed in the hope of making them popular. So that's like saying, oh, I guess where she was from, you'd have, like, 2NE1 or like EXO or something. They'd have, like, their song lyrics on the bubblegum wrappers. So I guess people like that, and that's where Mendoza seems to learn a lot of her lyrics from, or a lot of the words from. So it makes sense. It makes sense to have that there, because if it wasn't there, you would be like, well, why would she learn words for her song lyrics from bubblegum rappers? So it would probably be make this deletion. No, they shouldn't make this deletion. But if we look at F, it says yes because the information is unrelated. Well, no, we know it is related, right? Yes, because the information diminishes the musical accomplishments and successes of Lydia Mendoza and her family. Does this make it like, oh, well, all her success, all of it, it's meaningless now? or it makes it less important. No, she still had to struggle and they still had to work hard, and they went through all this stuff to really be successful. If you look at H, no, because the information explains the reference to bubblegum wrappers, which might otherwise puzzle readers. Yeah, I mean, it explains why she's talking about bubblegum wrappers, and it might puzzle the readers. And then J, no, because the information shows how popular the songs were that Lydia Mendoza performed. Does the information show how popular they were? Like, she read lyrics from bubblegum rappers and that's why her songs were so popular? No, that doesn't make sense. So H would have to be the answer. All right, 25. Very good, a short one. I really like getting these shorter ones towards the end, especially because you might get like mentally fatigued. And so if you see one of these at the end, obviously you're like, but you know, these are better. 25, in 1928 in San Antonio, Texas, where Mendoza and her family made their first recording. All right, this should basically jump out at you as a run-on sentence, because you have the relative pronoun where, which makes where Mendoza and her family made their first recording basically just like a big modifying phrase that's not part of the sentence, as in you don't really have to pay attention to that as like where the subject or verb is. So it says you start off the sentence with prepositions in 1928 in San Antonio. You can also ignore that. Those aren't essential parts of the sentence, and whatever nouns are part of that are not going to be the subject of the sentence or the verb of the sentence. And you have that followed with what? A relative pronoun? Well, where's the subject? Where's the verb? Nowhere. So the only way you could fix this is basically by eliminating the word where, so the subject would become Mendoza and her family. The verb would be made. Okay? So do you guys understand that? Hopefully you do. Omit the underlined portion would have to be the correct answer. No change wouldn't. It was where that. Wow, that's a lot of stuff. And then was where. If you say was where in 1928 in San Antonio, Texas, comma, was where Mendoza and her family made their first recording, that wouldn't make sense. You could say San Antonio, Texas was where, but because you have this in, and you have the comma that separates the subject from the verb, it becomes very clear that this is just a prepositional phrase and that can't be the subject. So if you have was where, you have a verb with no subject. And if you say it was where that, B, in 1925 in San Antonio, Texas, it was where that. It could be the subject, was. It was where that. Oh wow, you can just tell there's something wrong there. Where is a relative pronoun. That is a relative pronoun. You have two relative pronouns in a row. That's like saying, I went to school when, where, you know, the teacher went crazy, right? You have to say, I went to school where the teacher went crazy, or when. That would denote some kind of time. But saying where that is kind of like doubling up, all right? All right, on to 26. 26, it says, her clear and expressive singing style soon gained her widespread popularity in the Spanish-speaking regions of North and South America. All right, the first choice is no change, and really it should be no change. The reason is that you basically have it gained her popularity, and then you have in, of. Okay, these are both prepositions, meaning what comes after are part of that prepositional phrase. So you have one prepositional phrase in the Spanish-speaking regions, another prepositional phrase of North and South America. Don't separate the prepositional phrases from each other or from other parts of the sentence with punctuation marks. They're really not needed, and actually they're grammatically incorrect. Okay. So no change would be the correct answer, but just to look, you have G, popularity, colon, in the same issue. You just don't need this colon. And just as a refresher, colon is used basically just to list things out. Like if you say a baked pie consists of 4 ingredients: colon, flour, comma, milk, comma, eggs, comma, and sugar. I don't know, something like that. Or just a colon and then you have a description that describes in further detail what we're just talking about. But in this case, there is no need for a colon at all. H and J have the same problem. Unnecessary commas separating parts of the sentence from the prepositional phrases and prepositional phrases from each other. No need for that separation. So the only answer choice that makes sense here is F. All right, on to question 27. Upon reviewing this paragraph and finding that some information has been left out, oh my God, the writer composed the following sentence incorporating that information. She became widely known as La Alondra de la Frontera, the meadowlark of the border. This sentence would most logically be placed after sentence. All right, these kinds of questions, I find that they require more mental energy, but you know, maybe you're different. Okay, after sentence 3, this Mendoza family made their living working alternately as field hands, and they were touring musicians. Well, not yet, because this sentence is about how she became really famous and she became well known as this name, right? So not yet. They're still working. Mendoza learned the words to many of her songs from bubblegum rappers. Or blah, blah, blah. That's more just about how she's not famous yet and no one knows her. In 1928 in San Antonio, where Mendoza and her family made their first recording, same issue. Her clear and expressive singing style soon gained her widespread popularity in the Spanish-speaking regions of North and South America. So now she made it. She's becoming very, very popular. Now that she's become popular, it makes sense to say she became widely known as La Alondra de la Frontera. So the answer would have to be after sentence 6, which would be answer choice D. All right. Given that all the choices are true, which one would most effectively tie together the two main subjects of this essay? All right. Others have followed Lydia Mendoza's lead and have immigrated to the United States from Mexico. Well, does F do it? Does F tie the two main subjects together? Not really. It's not about immigrating, is it? You could say it's about Tejano music. So, no change wouldn't work because is this about, one, the two main subjects following her lead as the first thing, and is the second subject of the whole passage immigrating to the US? No, that's not it. So, it couldn't be F. What about G? And have expanded the influence of Tejano music. Well, that makes sense because a lot of this is about Tejano music and Mendoza just being one example of that. What about H? Such as Santiago Jimenez and his son Flaco. Who are these guys? Yeah, you have Hispanic sounding names. Let's just throw them into the paragraph. I mean, you can sort of figure out these are probably Tejano musicians, but this is not about but if you want to be a lot more specific, this is about expanding the influence of Tejano music, how just like Mendoza expanded the influence of Tejano music, this is not about listing examples of people who may or may not have been involved. And then you have, and have signed large recording contracts. Wow, talk about random. This sort of has to do with music, but this is not about, wow, look at these giant recording contracts they have. They're so rich. Like, this is not about that at all. So the only answer choice that makes sense is G. Okay? 29. All right. 29. Tejano music, like other folk music forms, Tejano music has an intensity, literary richness, and rhythmic variety. That means it'll stick around a while. Okay. First of all, keep in mind that the tone is an actual issue. As in, if you have a somewhat formal tone throughout the whole essay, and then you have like, it'll stick around a while, that's like, a very informal way of writing that really contrasts too much with what came before. So that should set you off. There's something probably wrong. The other problem is it'll stick around a while. Well, this is not about really sticking around, but the whole thing is about kind of the expansion and people finding out more and more about Tejano music, right? It's not about, oh, it'll stick around in certain circles, you know, because it could stick around and just, you know, small groups of people play it, but not really a lot. So it's not exactly a proper conclusion to what the essay is trying to say about Tejano music. So A wouldn't be correct. B is wrong because even though the meaning of it is correct, it's about enduring things, timeless people, something like that. It is redundant. There's an issue of repetition where it says enduring and timeless. Well, if it's enduring, it is timeless. So you don't need to say both. So you know for that reason it's incorrect. C makes lots of people really like it. That's the informal thing. Makes them happy. Like, it's just, it's more of that kind of informal tone. But again, this is not about, first of all, if you say lots of people, that's very subjective, right? Lots of people could be 1,000 or 10,000, but in the music world, that's like nothing. So it is sort of vague. Whereas if you have D, ensures its continued vitality, that talks about this issue where the tradition continues, it's growing, and it keeps in line with the formal, with the not totally formal, but the more formalish tone of the essay. So D would be the correct answer here. And last, I don't like to get one of these at the very end. Suppose the writer's goal had been to write a brief essay focusing on the history and development of Tejano music. Would this essay successfully fulfill that goal? If you think about it, probably, yeah, because it talks about where did Tejano music come from, you know, like German influences combined with the native influences. And then it gives a good example, one of the first examples of Tejano music, like that, you know, Mendoza woman. So yes, because the essay describes the origins of Tejano music and one of its early important figures. Sure, right? What about G? Yes, because the essay mentions the contributions that Tejano music has made to other folk music traditions. Is this about how they've contributed to other folk music traditions? Well, the essay wasn't really about that. But even if it had mentions of that or significant mentions of that, would that help? Would that be a focus on the history and development of Tejano music itself? No, the contributions it makes to other folk music isn't about its own history and development. So G wouldn't be correct. If you have H, it says this wouldn't be correct just because we can gather the answer is correct, yes. But if we look at H, it says no because the essay refers to other musical forms besides Tejano music. So what? Tejano music was a blend of different musical forms. It wasn't just, you know, by itself. And mentioning other music forms doesn't mean it doesn't talk about its own history and development. So H would be wrong. And then J, no, because the essay focuses on only one Tejano musician, Lydia. Well, it doesn't need to focus on everyone, right? Lydia Mendoza was one of the earliest popular singers of this musical tradition. So it makes sense to talk about her. And then besides that, it talks about, you know, many of the other, like where this Tejano music, where did it come from, how did it develop. So it doesn't have to talk about, you know, 10 different people who started this type of music just to have enough of a focus on the history and development of Tejano music. So the only answer that makes sense is F. That's it for passage 2. After this, we'll be going through to passage 3. All right.